Hey, welcome everybody. This is Pastured Poultry Talk, where we show the know-how, the insights, and the business perspectives of the pastured poultry movement. This is episode 116, and I'm your host, Mike Badger. I'm going to be joined by Greg Gunthorp from Gunthorp Farms to talk about his decision to halt his pastured poultry, specifically his pastured chicken farming and processing in 2021. We'll find out how COVID and current events impacted his farm's wholesale to restaurant business, and we're going to discover just how much those events played into his decision here in 2021 to step aside from pastured chicken. You know, I can't talk with Greg and not cover some processing, so we'll spend some time figuring out where no man's land is and get Greg's best advice for those of you who may be considering a USDA plant. Get some of that Greg wisdom that everybody seeks. Greg is one of the most recognizable names in the pastured community, especially when it comes to processing and just general advocacy for the rural America. He's always made time for my phone calls and my emails and my text messages, and I'm thankful that he made time to have this chat, especially after I told him that I wanted to talk about his decision not to raise chickens. But the story is important, and there's much wisdom to be gleaned over the next hour. Our discussion about staying out of no man's land and the musing from Greg that he may have been better off sticking to 20,000 birds a year still resonates with me. I'll unpack those thoughts in the next episode. I won't interject them here in Greg's conversation. But before we jump into Greg's conversation, I'd like to introduce you to our new show sponsor, The Bird Nerd. The Bird Nerd supplies poultry man processing equipment and supplies that are directly relevant to the pastured poultry community. I've moved all my equipment sales away from my farm business and into its own website. That's just easier to navigate, easier to identify, and really a reflection of what you're going to get when you get to thebirdnerd.biz, which is accurate, practical, in-depth knowledge about how to use the equipment that we sell there. So my goal with Bird Nerd is not to be a one-stop shop for everything, but it's to match the needs of the pastured poultry growers to the best made in the USA products I can find. You know, our featured flagship brand is the Poultryman line of processing equipment. That's still heavily the cornerstone of the Bird Nerd. And featured products there include Poultryman rotary scalders and pluckers, including stainless steel pluckers with doors. And then some of the other highlighted products we have there, check out our shippable inventory of 5-foot galvanized trough feeders, which are really, really awesome. We'll calculate the shipping at checkout, and we'll get it to you in a couple days. You can find all this by visiting the Bird Nerd at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/Bird Nerd. That's BIRDNERD, Bird Nerd. Take me all the way back to your first chickens, and I'm just curious where you started.
I don't think most people know, but we should take you back long before that. I always had a few chickens growing up, and had them, and I didn't realize they were what they were at the time. But tractors kind of moved them around the garden when I was, that'd have been early 1980s, 80, 82. I probably even had a few before that because I think I had a few during the blizzard of 78. Lost a silver-laced Wyandotte hen that got stuck that didn't find her till spring. My family's always raised a few chickens, mostly for our own use for some friends and family. And I grew up on a diversified crop and livestock farm growing pastured pigs. And I tried marketing mostly just pigs to start with in 98 to some restaurants. And we'd raised a few chickens, and it seemed like it was easier to get our foot in the door with broilers than it was with pork. We were doing, it was really small. We even tried some hens. My wife and I tried some laying hens, didn't really care for that. And so, I'm talking 150, 200 chickens a year at the most. We kind of jumped off the cliff, and that first year that Frontera asked us to do chickens, we did somewhere between 12 and 15,000. I like to say it was relationship marketing. It's grown since then by just me out banging on restaurant doors, talking to chefs, getting to know people, and that can either grow exponentially to the good or it can grow exponentially to the bad. And we apparently provided some people with some chicken that they liked, and it's that whole price quality service conundrum, and we fit in people's restaurants and on their menus, and especially with Rick Bayless at Frontier Grill, and he expanded immensely through this last 20 years, and he took us along for the ride on almost all of his places that he opened up. So it was there were some crazy expansion years through there. I think in 2008 to 2011, had we filled out the paperwork for Inc.'s 5,000 list, we would have been somewhere in the 1,700 fastest growing company in the country. We were doubling every year. It was at the right time in my life, and the kids was young, and we were adding acres and adding birds and adding pigs, and it was fun. But we started, my wife and I started processing 30 to 40 chickens a week as exempt processors in the yard.
You went from 200 birds kind of in one season and rapidly went to, like you said, 12 to 15,000. That's quite a big jump. Was all that driven by Frontera? Did you realize, hey, I got an opportunity here, and you started maybe bringing in some other people?
Most of that was driven by Frontera. It took that many birds back then. Well, it took more than that to keep up with them. And I probably made some false assumptions, assuming that there was lots of other chefs out there in the country that were similar to Chef Rick Bayless. And I don't know that was ever really and don't get me wrong, we've had some good restaurant customers, but I don't know that there's a lot of them anywhere in the country that are going to do volume and be willing to pay pastured poultry prices. We were in at the right time because the whole local food and farm to table movement was really, really trendy. And I think that grew up till about 2015. So we were, went from next to no chickens to what I consider a big amount of chickens overnight, and continued to grow till about a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm. And when I came into APA, and back in, I guess it was 2011 is when I officially came into APA, you were carrying the banner as kind of one of the, I think probably the largest pastured poultry grower in the U.S. for whatever that's worth. We just had a lot of those birds on the ground, and we're really trying to make it go.
I looking back on it, I don't know if we were ever the largest, because I think that I think maybe Will still was putting more birds on the ground at that point, and then I think maybe Paul, when he started to ramp his numbers up, I think maybe we were second for a long while. Yeah. I don't know if we ever made it to first, but I mean, we've put a lot of chickens out on pasture. I know that.
When did you make the move from exempt processing to your plant?
We've been USDA inspected at the farm for 16 years, and we were state inspected 3 years before that, and we were exempt for maybe a year. That's where I say that looking back on it, I think part of my assumptions on us needing to build a plant was that there was probably lots more restaurants like Frontier Grill out there, which I'm not sure was a good assumption, but we made it work anyways. So it's probably been a little over 20 years. Don't do the math, because we were selling those state inspected birds. I think the statute of limitations is gone, but we sold them in Indiana. They might not have got delivered in Indiana.
Right.
But we legitimately tried our best to sell our chickens in Indiana, and at the time, all of my leads just kept leading me back to Chicago. And we sell a sizable percentage of our production now in Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, but local food and the whole farm to table movement had not really made it to Indiana 20 years ago.
We won't get in this conversation. We won't get too far down the processing rabbit hole. It's been necessary for you to get very competent in the processing space, whether it's the technical pieces or the legislation and the regulatory pieces. Yep. But that's a conversation probably to go into depth in another day. But I do want to kind of ask you then, you went through kind of all three levels of the evolution there, the exempt, state, and USDA. If you were to give somebody some advice on pursuing a USDA inspection for their plant, what would it be like before they even started getting out their checkbook and they were just thinking about that idea, like they think I need to be inspected. What would you be telling them to be watching out for?
I wish someone would have told me this next piece of advice, and then I probably wouldn't have listened anyways. But I think on USDA inspected chicken slaughter and processing plants, I always tell everybody, think in terms of pig or beef equivalent in carcasses. And by that I mean I don't think there's anybody that goes out and builds USDA slaughter and processing operations for 1 or 2 beef a week. And I built a USDA inspected chicken plant on the farm to do the equivalent of 2 beef a week. It's an uphill battle because as much as we want to say otherwise, processing and slaughter is more like the other counterparts in the livestock industry that are confinement. It's all about capital. It's all about throughput, and it's all about, managing debt and figuring out how to pay for it and getting employees and figuring out how to manage those in an efficient manner and take live animals in the one end and turn them into product out the other end consistently,
right, for
what your customer wants. And it's completely different than raising animals on pasture. It's a whole different world. And I wish somebody would have told me that. It's a whole different world, and it can be a hamster wheel, an economic hamster wheel.
Part of the compounding problem there is pasture poultry is typically seasonal, unless you're the lucky 20% in the southern U.S., right?
We've done some innovative things over the years to get it to the point that we've got a relatively consistent amount of birds coming through the plant for about 40 to 42 weeks. And that's about as far as we dare pushed it. And then use those people during the winter to process some of the products that we put away frozen without boned out and into retail packaging. So my son did a really good job of kind of evening that out, but it's still a really, really big challenge because people that want to work full-time and full-time every week year round.
Take us back basically a year ago, right before COVID came on the scene. What did your pasture poultry market look like? What were you recognizing as some of your pain points in your model then? Like, you had grown, you're servicing a lot of restaurants, but I know from conversations in some of the APA conferences, you were recognizing something in the market. And so where was that?
I think our big challenge was that we were either too big or we were too small. And the big thing that I noticed, and I think it really started around 2015, is that pastured poultry has an awful lot of competition by, especially the pastured chicken, because I'm only mostly talking about pastured chicken here. Pastured chicken has an awful lot of competition by other specialty chicken. We'd always seen it somewhat as natural 20 years ago that really didn't mean anything. And then it was antibiotic free, which I still never really believed meant anything because I'm not sure that they actually took the antibiotics out. But if they did, it was only in the occasional barn that they could get away with taking the antibiotics out. And then it was free roaming, which means nothing because nobody raises broilers in a cage. And now the big thing is the outside access, put a hole in the side of the barn and sometimes do, sometimes don't let the chickens out. And no pastured chicken producer can compete against that. I mean, we have more labor in our birds just moving them out to the field than what they do in their whole system. And, the small processor and the small pastured chicken producer with movement doesn't stand a chance competing against these big stationary houses. It's a rough market to compete against. And I think part of it, I always sum it up as I think a lot of it has to do with that when you get all said and done, the chicken industry, and I don't like it for it, but they've done one thing really, really well, and that's that they've convinced everybody that you should be able to have chicken whenever you want it, and it should be really, really cheap. Will Harris sends me a picture every once in a while from a menu back at the turn of the last century. I want to say it was like 1916 or something, and the price for chicken on the menu was more expensive than the price for beef on the menu. And I think when we get all said and done, I think the pastured chicken industry really, really struggles to produce chicken any cheaper than you can produce grass-fed beef. And in the marketplace, and especially I think that's got worse. And then I also don't think we helped it by getting really big to the point that we couldn't go direct to consumer and head to wholesale at all. I think is much more difficult to differentiate and get the price that you need out of pastured chicken compared to some of the other proteins that can be raised on the farm.
Yeah, now you said something there that was kind of interesting at the beginning. You said you were either too big or too small. Can you break that down a little bit? When you're too big at your scale, what does that mean?
There's all kinds of levels of doing pastured chickens. In Indiana, we'd have the option of doing up to 1,000 a year with no inspection at all. That could be a very, very low overhead operation. You could do up to the 20,000 a year without bringing in the hassle of the Board of Animal Health or the USDA. That's a significantly lower level of management, lower cost to do that. And then at that smaller scale, it's not a huge monumental task to direct market all of those directly to consumers. We went to 120,000 broilers a year, to 120,000 broilers a year, and maybe I'm just giving myself excuses, but at that level, I didn't think that we have the opportunity to direct market them directly to individuals at full retail price. And we'd have probably been better off, at 20,000 birds direct to consumer, as a chicken enterprise that was added on to something else on the farm rather than a standalone enterprise that brings in USDA, brings in all of the, refrigerated trucks going in every which direction. And I've sat down and done the numbers. I think if we would have went to 5 days a week of chicken slaughter, 8 hours a day, that we probably could have got ourselves to a price point and could have fit in the current system. But I don't know that there's anybody, including me and our family, that really has any desire to raise that many chickens and to process that many chickens and to market that many chickens. Once you start down that whole route of USDA inspection and bringing in employees and marketing 3 hours from the farm in every direction, and there's a certain scale that's required for that. Yeah. And we probably didn't keep pace with what that scale needed to be. It all probably worked until we decided that, hey, this has got as big as we needed it to go, and we really don't want it to go any bigger.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you bring it right back to the processing. Also, when you get to that 120,000 bird level, that's a big number of pastured birds, but in the commercial poultry marketplace, you're just a hobby farmer, quote unquote, right? Yep, you got right. One barn a year. Yep. And you're going to work 9 to 5 in town somewhere, right?
Right. But to take it to that next level, and I think I've told you this before, I read a book called No Man's Land by Doug Tatum. And I think if you look at lots of industries, and I think trucking is a really good example, there's still, I like to call them mom and pop, but there's still the independent trucker that owns his own truck, right. Makes a decent living. And then you go to it takes 250 to 400 trucks for there to be a trucking company. There's not really much of anything in between. And we kind of put ourselves there in the chicken business, and we probably, to continue, we would have needed to spend, 250 to 700,000 to kind of automate the plan a little bit, and then would have had to put in all the systems in place for chicken managers and supervisors and and all of that stuff. And it really comes down to really didn't have the desire to do that.
I'm still trying to figure out in our space where exactly no man's land is, but I think about that often, and I know we've had that conversation, but I think, where does it happen? Like, I don't know that we know quite yet, but
I really think that once you step out of that that 20,000 exemption. Once you decide that you want to go above that, I think you're in no man's land. I think that, the numbers show it. What is there? There's less than 20 very small USDA poultry slaughter plants in the country. I mean, it's, there's the expression, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. I mean, the small chicken plants definitely fit in that. They're a thing of the past unless you've got a really, really good plan on why you're there.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that line right there. It makes a lot of sense. It definitely, for a lot of reasons, makes up the bulk of the pasture poultry farms in that less than 20,000 broilers a year.
Right. I mean, it's a system, I think, that works, and it's a system that actually adds value to the farm. And I've had a conversation with a couple people, but one that really put the thought in the back of my head was, Blake Hitsfield and 7 Sons. They've intentionally never added processing on their farm. I think the reason that they've done that is to look at it and see whether it really adds value. Going forward, we really want our processing plant something that is not just a necessary evil, but something that really adds value to what we do on the farm. And I think that's complicated in chickens. In the processing plant really becomes a necessary evil. And if you can't make it more than a necessary evil, it's too much economically, and it's especially too much headaches from the regulatory standpoint.
So then COVID happens, right? So we go back on our timeline here. What did that do for you, Greg? And I know it hurt, right? Because it impacted all your wholesale market is in restaurants, most of it, right?
Yep.
So you were left to try to pivot to, first you didn't know how long everything was going to last, but then you're trying to pivot to direct to consumer. So just take me through that a little bit.
I can remember when Illinois said they were shutting down the restaurants. I think I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. Indiana followed quickly. Michigan followed quickly, and we were almost exclusively wholesale to restaurants. What we weren't was wholesale into a charcuterie shop, a USDA expected charcuterie shop, and some universities. So literally almost all of our almost all of our customer base shut off overnight. We were really, really fortunate through those first 2 months because we were able to pivot. Our family and our employees did an amazing job because we packaged almost everything bulk wholesale for institutions. And we switched within 2 weeks and did almost everything portioned for retail. Craziest 2 weeks of our life. I don't think that we would have planned that level of changes in 2 years had we sat down and decided that we were going to do it. But we did it. For 2 months, we'd actually had lower sales the year before and had some extra frozen inventory coming into it. And we emptied out the freezers. I mean, it was the craziest sales ever. I thought it was going to be all over, and it was insanely busy. Until the riot started and until it was no longer the front page news that the store shelves was empty and that meat and all that was struggling. And just like shutting the faucet off, then it shut off for us. Our third quarter was rough, and it slowly started to pick up some. Maybe looks like there's a potential that it's going back to normal, but the biggest struggle that we had on chickens was carcass utilization. We'd actually done a really good job, and I like to call it safety net marketing, where we have a customer base, and then we have products that we can turn that into, say, for example, you sell a whole leg, or you can sell a boneless leg, and you got customers that'll take a ground chicken product of some kind, frozen, so that worst case scenario, we can turn it into something else that we can sell it. We just threw our whole marketing program just right out the window because we were butchering birds that we didn't have the slightest idea who we were selling them to, didn't have the slightest idea what products to even put them into in the freezer. It's stressful during the season anyways. It's beyond stressful processing birds and not having the slightest idea. And it actually worked out better than I expected, but it was You can't imagine and comprehend the level of stress. That's one of the big factors in us taking a break on the chickens, is that we just have so many more opportunities and so many more levels of those safety nets, like I like to call them, on the pigs, on products that we can turn them into, customers that we can sell them to the point that we can keep our freezer inventory in balance and not out of whack.
So you're saying then you actually did get your packaging and everything set up. I know you're doing a lot of direct marketing there early on, and then so you kind of made it over one hurdle, and then you're saying the riots caused another disruption in the process?
Yep. We pivoted mostly. We've done a little bit of direct to consumer. It's not a really big percentage. We're doing some online fulfillment, and we're doing some pickups at the farm. It's still not a sizable percentage of our business. I think it'd take quite a few years, and we're still going to continue to work on that. Most of what our pivot was wholesaling to other retailers. Some of those other farms that were short, some of them just retailers. As the world came back to normal, or I guess not really the world come back to normal, as the big packers started to figure out how to remain open and deal with their employees being sick and then being COVID hotspots. As that came back to normal, the retail opportunities for us went way back to normal, like pre-COVID levels. So people that were wanting stuff from us. I mean, we even got calls from Myers and Safeway. When Myers and Safeway is calling Gunthorp's the world's in trouble, we didn't sell them anything. We could have sold anything we had for that middle of March till middle of May. And then from about 1st of June till probably September, I mean, it was the opposite. Those same retailers that was just hounding you didn't need anything. And the other farmers that we were supplying had their own birds through that time frame. So, I mean, and we put an awful lot of chicken in the freezer, and we put some of it in the freezer in the wrong forms, processed in the wrong manner. But I mean, we didn't know any better at the time. We made the best decisions we had with the information we had at the time. And, like I said, it is what it is. And that's, it's one of the factors in us. We're taking a break on the chickens for a while.
Yep. So to 2021, you're not doing any chickens. What about the other species you did, like duck or turkey?
We actually quit the duck in the middle of 2020 because that one, out of everything we did, that one got the craziest. We could sell duck breast. We could not sell duck legs during the pandemic. I think virtually all of the restaurants that we sold to that were doing carry out, none of them had a duck on their menu, which I can't blame them. There was a sizable shift in what restaurants, even fine dining restaurants, ordered. We could sell all of our wings and our ribs after the pandemic to really, really nice restaurants, and none of them would have ever thought of putting those on. And, duck doesn't carry well. It's got to be cooked just perfect, and it's amazing. Mm-hmm. But, it's not something that you can put in a carry-out container and people take home in 20 or 30 minutes later and eat it. So we'd cut that back. Our turkey sales were phenomenal. We sold more whole turkeys in 2020 than we ever had by a long shot. We sold over 7,000 whole turkeys for Thanksgiving, and kind of bailed us out on turkeys because we were down on breast, not really down on ground, but we'd never priced our ground to the point we could afford to put breasts in it. So the turkeys were still good. Our challenge going forward is that without a chicken processing crew, we really can't do the number of turkeys that we've done in the past because we do the turkeys highly seasonal, and we just won't have the people to be able to process them. So, but we're still going to do some turkeys, and if we can figure out labor component out, we'll go back to the same number on turkeys. There's that one day a year, Thanksgiving. There's I think all of the pasture poultry people have to be thankful. Man, we bring in an awful lot of people that aren't willing to even discuss purchasing products from us that'll buy a pastured turkey for Thanksgiving. If we could get that level of demand the rest of the year, all of us would be so swamped. It'd be like March and April of 2020 perpetually.
Thinking about the seasonal turkey, even ducks when there's a restaurant market, but do you think there's a better opportunity these days for things like turkey or duck or the non-chicken, I guess, the non-pasture raised chicken?
Yeah, I think in general, there are different markets, but I think in general that there's a larger customer base that's willing to pay a premium for non-chicken products, especially that one day a year for turkey. But turkey demand overall, ground turkey and turkey breast, I think is really good the remainder of the year. And duck's a really specialty product, but man, if you can find and connect with foodies that want a good duck, they'll pay the price, no problem.
Yeah. Now you probably answered this question, but I just wanted to. I mean, you did by omission, but I want to ask it because your turkey processing will be seasonal, so you're not going to do any. You're not going to open up the processing shop and do custom processing for people.
We're not going to on poultry. And I think that's as much that whole factor of, well, it's twofold, the seasonality. And then the other thing is that we have twice as much payroll for processing pounds of chickens compared to pounds of pigs. And we'd never custom processed pigs for people before the pandemic. And we started in that third quarter of 2020 just to help bring in some money to help cover payroll. And we've actually liked it. That's one of our flexes that we're going to keep is we're going to we've been processing pigs for other people. I don't foresee the day that we process chickens, turkeys, ducks for other people. It's too difficult to staff, too tight on the margins. Now, having said that, if another USDA poultry processing plant would pop up in our area that would do turkeys, we'd send them turkeys in a heartbeat. We'd continue to raise the same number of turkeys.
Well, and
if it was somebody else's headache for figuring out how to find the people.
Well, hey, there's a guy, he's an APA member, in LaGrange. He runs
Perry Troyer.
Oh yeah, Perry Troyer. There you
go. Yep. Yeah, they're talking about it, and I keep telling him that we'd bring them turkeys, but I don't think they're going to get it pulled off this year. I wish them luck, and I've been helping them.
Gotcha.
Everything. They're largely there's a huge overlap in that group, and the Seven Sons grass-fed beef producers, and really good people. Our biggest retail customer had on chickens had got to be Seven Sons, and those guys are just marketing machines.
Right.
And that was one of the other factors in the whole thing. We'd kept telling them for the last couple of years that we weren't going to continue to scale our chickens. And I never gave it any consideration that they would actually switch to somebody else, that they wouldn't do our chickens plus somebody else's. And I understand completely, especially since we start to do some internet fulfillment, why they wouldn't do that. Now, they've got Perry and their group to raise some chickens, and Moyers was sending the chicks to them. And we actually ran a few more birds through the plant this last year than what we normally did. We'd cut our numbers back a little bit, and they raised their numbers, and they brought labor, and it actually worked out quite well. But then Seven Sons had kept us on at the beginning of the pandemic, and they were switching to David Boatwright. And then they also had the grass feather, the Amish group, Perry's group. They cut us off first. Then they cut the Amish guys off. That was probably another factor in the because we were still running as many birds, or actually a little more birds through the plant, and had some part-time labor from the Amish group, and that actually worked out really well. But that didn't work out for their market.
No matter where you go, like the the poultry space is always like convoluted and inbred. Like there's so many connections to it.
Yeah.
Even in pastured.
And the talking about convoluted and stories, we were doing a boneless, skinless thigh for one of the Bon Appetits, one of the universities close by, and he and I tried not to laugh when he told me who he was going to switch to. When I said that we wouldn't be able to do them anymore, he's like, "Oh, that's no problem. I'll get them from these guys." And I'm thinking, you don't realize that we supply them. And he come back a couple weeks later and he's like, "Greg, I can't get it from them. They were getting your chicken." I'm like, "I could have told you that if you'd asked." It's a really, really small world. It's a really, really small world.
And I won't hold you to this now. So is there a point where you come back into the pastured chicken?
I really like chickens. I wouldn't mind doing some. I don't know that economically that it ever really makes sense for us, but I really like them. So I'm for sure not ruling it out.
Yeah.
And we'd have to make some changes. I don't know that we'd want to spend the amount of money, but because we'd have to make slaughter and processing a little bit easier, and we'll probably always continue the wholesale to restaurants. I think the longer that we wait it out, I think the worse we'll get on being competitive in the industry, because I think that's just going to continue to get worse. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it is.
Well, then that'll be a good transition for us. But I just want to say, Greg, that when you sent me that text the other, I don't know, month or two ago, it said you were taking a break. I got to admit, I was a little sad, because for the time that I've been in Napa, for sure, in pasture poultry, like you've been a cornerstone of the movement, and responsible for a lot of good things that have happened, and a lot of knowledge and wisdom transfer, and that's an awesome thing, and definitely a piece of our community. And I'm hoping that the turkeys keep you plugged in.
Yeah, I mean, our turkeys aren't going away. I'd probably foresee us adding ducks back before we would add chickens back. But yeah, I mean, it's always a possibility. I don't think it's very likely, but it's always a possibility.
Let's talk a little bit about rural America and independent farmers. And I know this is a recurring conversation for you. And I just want to ask you, the big question here, I guess, is what's the biggest challenge facing independent farms right now, or even just rural America? Like when you look out there, the stuff that you've experienced, lived through, what you see happening, like what are we facing?
I think concentration and consolidation are the biggest issues. I think those are issues that are near and dear to my heart, and I spend way too much of my time and resources fighting against concentration and consolidation. I don't think even the average farmer realizes the level that we've got to. And I'm a big fan of competition in the marketplace, and I think that open, fair, transparent, competitive market is good for not just farmers, but consumers and rural America. And, as we continue down this road, farmers are harmed, consumers are harmed. I think that we're getting dangerously close to our national security being harmed in that, and we've seen the glimpses of it at the beginning of the pandemic, where we really don't have a resilient food supply. And, we can sit there and talk about industrialized food and all of the ills that it has, and it has a bunch. But, it's also extremely efficient and productive. We can't come close to competing against their price. But, man, if the hits the fan, I don't know that they can fill the grocery store shelf. Small ag, as I like to call it, or niche ag, we had no problems filling our orders, plus some. Big ag, euthanized pigs and hens, dumped milk, didn't take cattle to the processing plants. I mean, that was a severe disruption in the marketplace. And, as this concentration continues, independent farmers really, really struggle to get a reasonable share of the retail dollar. And I think that's our biggest challenge, is that as independent farmers, we have to get a reasonable and equitable share of that retail dollar.
I think back to that consolidation, and I made a note of this in your Politics from the Pasture Facebook group, and I don't know what post it was on, but one of the comments you said that most people don't realize we keep about 1 lane head per person, or about 300 million hens in this country. When farms consist of millions of hens, then 95% of the eggs in the U.S. come from less than 200 farms. Can you unpack that a little bit?
I'm a numbers person, and I love to share numbers with people. I don't know that it ever really changes people's thoughts. We actually have less milk cows in this country than we have horses in this country, but the dairy farms are trending towards 20,000 to 70,000 cow dairies. When you only have 9 million cows in this country, or milk cows, it doesn't take very many dairies eventually to provide all of the milk. Eggs are the same way. The 300 or 300 and change on million hens, and when you've got as many as 12 million hens on one farm, it doesn't take 200 of those. The new farrowing sites for pigs are 6,000 to 10,000 sows. It only takes about 800 farms in the United States at that scale to supply all of the pigs in the United States. About 90% of the cattle are finished on less than 2,000 feedlots, because those have as many as hundreds of thousands of cattle on each one of them now. So, I mean, we've very, very quickly consolidated and industrialized agriculture. And then you look at the other end of it, the retail end of it, and what I like to call the zombie brands. Almost all of the stuff in the grocery store, even though it has different names on it as different brands, it's owned by and controlled by the same handful of multinational corporations. We really don't have choices. And as small farmers, and lots of the Apple people would think we're a big farm, we really don't have access to putting our products into those retail spaces. So, we're kind of left on the fringes of agriculture. And to be quite honest, there's going to be lots of farms that, just really have no desire to get into the direct marketing end of it. And if you do, the management level and labor's a lot higher. And I think that all of us are going to struggle to figure out how to capture a decent percentage of that retail dollar without there being a fair and competitive and transparent niche and commodity agriculture. And I think I've been to Europe a couple times, and I think that, and I'm not exactly sure what the factors are here, but man, we are just set up so horribly worse here on transparencies and differences in different production systems and how those are portrayed in the marketplace, and how farmers that actually are going to choose to produce something that costs a little bit more, or takes more labor or more effort. In Europe, they get compensated for that. Consumers have the choice of buying it. Here, the lines get really, really blurred in the grocery store. Even educated farmers really struggle to figure out whose brands are whose. I didn't realize till just the other day that ADM produces King Arthur's flour, Aldi's flour, Pillsbury's flour. So, I mean, they're all the same. And lots of things are that way. The JBS salmonella recall shows you that Grass Run's, Simple Truth, and Laura's Lean all comes out of the JBS plant down in Arizona. So it's like, I don't think anybody really gives that a whole lot of thought.
Should they, though, especially the farmers who are working under contract with those companies? I mean, should they be paying more attention to that?
my big argument is that without a fair and transparent marketplace, they're taking the commodity farmers' products, selling it at a premium at retail, and not paying the commodity farmers anymore. At the same time, those products are significantly cutting into the demand for all of us niche farmers. That's not the way that a competitive market should work. And it puts all of us, commodity and niche farmers, at a huge, huge disadvantage. I grew up on a pig farm, and pigs before the 1990s were a textbook example of how supply and demand and how competitive markets work. And they're not that anymore at all since 98. But before that, they were. When, the price went up, farmers grew more pigs. When the price went down, farmers got rid of some sows. And now we largely have a meat poultry industry that is so much capital involved that even when the market's bad, they've got so much capital infrastructure there that they just continue to produce. And we've massively overproduced food in this country for decades, and we have no means of controlling that. And farmers get the worst end of that. Someday we're going to change it, though. Someday. And I think the big thing is that, and I applaud all of the app people, because I think the big thing that those of us that direct market, is that we can still, think globally and want to try to work on fixing some of the big picture problems in the food supply, while at the same time that we're acting locally and that individually on our farms, we're connecting with consumers that want to know our story and want to help support our operations and buy products that, either taste better or more nutritious for them, and that's better for the animal, better for the environment. In lots of ways, I probably come across too negative and too cynical, but, the flip side of it is that if you'd asked me 20 years ago if it grew the business to the point that we had 30 full-time employees on the farm and had trucks going to Chicago and Indianapolis and Detroit and shipping LTL shipments out all over the country, I'd have told you were nuts. So I guess in some ways, we really should consider ourselves fortunate.
Right. Bringing us here to some big news of the day, I guess most AppNet members probably know this. It's hard to avoid. Listeners to the podcast should probably know it, but it's beyond those little ecosystems. It's not really well known, I don't think, that Purdue is the largest pastured poultry producer in the country and has been for over a year now with their acquisition of Pastured. And you've said publicly that you understand the decision here, but you don't have to like it. So I'm paraphrasing, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I got two questions here. And the first question is simply, what's the problem or the danger with Purdue or any other integrator entering the pastured poultry space at a commercial scale? And I think perhaps more importantly, their business model. What's our risk here?
I'd made that comment because I understand Paul's decision perfectly. I still don't like it. My vision of a future is that we actually have a bunch of independent producers, independent processors. I think the biggest problem that we face going forward with companies like Purdue, with their Pastured, with Nyman Ranch, companies like Hormel owning Applegate, all of these bigger companies buying up little niche brands, is that halo effect marketing. An insignificant portion of their production is going to be in these ideal systems, and the overwhelming majority of their production is not really going to have changed, and they're going to get substantial premiums on the rest of that because there's a large portion of the marketplace, and I think that's maybe partially because we don't tell our story well enough, but that's also just because they get the retail space that, Purdue chicken now is all that much better because a very, very small portion of it is raised on pasture. That didn't change their, confinement chicken model, but they're, seen by everyone now is this great animal welfare group. And I think it's good in a way that, we've changed the world enough that the big guys are starting to take notice. But I also think it's horrible in a way that it's just going to eliminate a huge amount of marketing opportunities for small farmers. And that's what this whole movement is really supposed to be about, is more marketing opportunities for small producers.
And there you go, rolling out numbers with the Halo marketing, which I can tell you just doesn't cut through the emotional discussion that usually results from this question. We saw the emotional discussion on the APA list about this, and I think you have a very good way of looking at it. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for everybody, I think, involved. I'm not sure where the lines are.
It's going to be really tough. And, I can just envision how the sales discussions go. There's going to be people that are going to call them up and say, hey, we want pastured chicken. And they're going to quote them the prices. And they're going to be like, well, we can't afford that. And then they're going to say, well, we got this antibiotic-free chicken here. And then they're going to say, oh, they can't afford that. And then they're going to sell their conventional chicken for a little bit higher prices than what they normally would have. Whole Foods, I'll say I'm not a big fan. I think they're Walmart in a tuxedo. They were the ones that took this thing to the nth degree with their whole global animal partnership certifications. They were really good at first. There's some APA members that they put some money into their helped them build processing plants. They put a lot of money into Will's place down there. But now if you go into Whole Foods, almost all of their chicken is GAP 1. Virtually no GAP 4, GAP 5, which is what APA producers would certify at. Mm-hmm. So, the whole thing then becomes nothing more than halo marketing. That's not good. The whole goal should have been to change the food supply, not change an insignificant fraction of it.
And I don't know if you have an answer for this, but how does Purdue become a favorable thing for the pastured poultry producers? Is there a scenario where the community wins or individual farmers will get some benefit out of this? Or
I challenge people to look at their Nyman ranch model. I think that Nyman Ranch has actually been good for some pastured pig producers that had no desire or ability to want a direct market at scale, good pasture pig producers. And Nyman Ranch has been good to them over the years. I was very skeptical at first, but Nyman Ranch has been paying pastured pig producers substantial premiums over commodity pig prices. And I think that maybe the place that will be good for some producers is, if there's some cattle operations that got pasture that would like to bring on some fertility, it would be a substantially less investment, and you wouldn't be completely tied down to them like putting up chicken barns, to the point that person could add pastured chicken to bring the next generation onto the farm, raising them for Purdue, not have to worry about where they're getting processed, not have to worry about where they're getting sold. So, for some farmers, it's probably, there's a possibility that it can be good. Yeah. I still don't like it, but
yeah.
Because that's the big problem, I think, with the contract chicken model. And I think that's the big problem with this whole concentration and consolidation. Before, when there was bunches of packers and there were bunches of small farms, there was no restriction to entering or exiting the market. There was no restrictions to jumping around if whether you didn't get along with your who was buying your animals, or whether they weren't paying you well enough, or whatever the reason was. When my wife and I first got into pigs, we could sell pigs at 14 different places. If you didn't get along with a couple of them, it's no big deal. Right. You don't get along with a couple of them now, you don't have anywhere to sell your pigs.
Right.
And they know that. And competition breeds innovation, and positive change and all that kind of stuff. And now we don't have that at all. And the contract chicken growers, I mean, you see some of them that can speak out, but almost all of them can't speak out. But they got no choice if they don't get along with in this and don't fit in the system. They're just screwed, and they mortgage the whole farm on that working, and there's no real other options for it.
Yep. I don't know how this really ties in, but I'm kind of curious. I don't know that I've seen you talk about it, but Bill Gates, he's the largest, well, not the largest, but he's a large landowner, large farming landowner in the U.S., and he's a champion of synthetic meat, apparently. Does he have traction, or how do we counteract that kind of messaging? And
I'm convinced the whole Bill Gates of the world, the whole animal rights, the whole environmentals, the farmers talking about that they're all going to run us out of business. I think that's a red herring. And I think for several reasons. I think, first of all, if you say that animals are what's destroying the environment, I mentioned it earlier. Why do we have more horses in the United States than we have milk cows if animals are so? Why aren't we talking about how much land we take just to feed all of our pets? I mean, we could have a lot more valuable discussions. But then the other thing I think that you have to look at is if any of you walked in the store during the initial part of the pandemic, people bought meat and poultry like crazy. The only thing left in the on the shelves were those fake meat products. People aren't going to eat that if they've really got a choice. There's some people that are buying some of it because they really think that they're doing some good. But I tell those people, and I'm not a nutritionist, but I tell people, man, if you don't want to eat as much meat, more to it. That's completely fine, because as a country, we probably actually do eat too much meat per person. But don't switch to some fake alternative because of that. Eat more plants, eat more fruits and vegetables in the form that they come out of the ground. Don't let Bill Gates and all of their venture capital just take an industrialized meat supply and turn it into a very, very industrialized fake meat supply. We're going to have some serious consequences, especially in the developing countries around the world, if that's the switch we make, because those people have zero access to that technology to actually produce food for themselves. And that's just flat out wrong.
Seems to me if you can control that technology, then and deliver it to all over the place, you stand to get ahead in life.
Oh yeah, it'd be then a really good idea to buy up as much farmland as you could. Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's just it all comes back to that same thing that I said I spend a lot of time on. Concentration and consolidation and the resulting wealth and income inequalities that result from it. And we've got serious problems, country. And Bill Gates buying up farmland, and Bill Gates trying to switch people away from real food that can actually be grown at any scale around the world to something that's highly industrialized and highly processed is not a good thing for anyone.
Last thought, and then we'll wrap. I remember the first APA conference that we had back in the rodeo arena, and it just goes to your point of the consolidation kind of brought it out. And I remember sitting there thinking that all these producers in this room, all these chickens, and I started to see consolidation within our own group, the people who were turning out those commercial meat birds at some kind of scale, and then the people who were not going to that scale and were deliberately trying to be smaller and find their sweet spots, to use Tom Delahanty's analogy. We're seeing that play out in some interesting ways in 2021, I think, and it'll be an interesting ride from here. But I'm really happy, Greg, to have the conversation, and I'll give you the last word.
Thanks for calling, Mike, because this was fun. I still think there's huge opportunities. I just still think it comes back to the each of us individually have to figure out something that we can do that really connects with our consumer base and that allows us to actually add value to the farm and do it in a manner that's not just a huge risk to the farm. So I think there's some exciting opportunities for us here at the farm in the future, and I'm not going anywhere. So I love the APA group and the APA people. So I'm gonna stay connected. So.
Awesome. I know you have a Facebook group, but where can people go if they want to have some more conversations about consolidation and kind of the politics of food and stuff?
My daughter and I have a Facebook group, Politics from the Pastures, where we discuss local, state, national, and international politics around food and farming. Love for you to come on over there. We've got 1,000 and some people that discuss some issues. So, and if anybody's ever got a question, I follow the APA email listserv, also on several Facebook groups. And I try my best if people call, text, or email. I'm not always the quickest at getting back, but I try my best to actually answer phone calls and answer texts and emails. So love to talk to people. So.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you all for listening. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast. It's free. It's the way you can get notified of future episodes. You can do that by visiting pasturepoultrytalk.com/116 or just hitting the follow or like button there in your favorite podcast app. See you next episode.